US airlines have raised $10 billion in a week through debt and equity as the struggling industry grapples with sharply reduced flying schedules amid the global pandemic. Shares in American Airlines, however, snapped a 6 day losing streak on Thursday, despite concerns about rising infections in a number of key states in the US. Joining me to discuss the outlook for the sector is Russ Mould. He's the investment director at AJ Bell. Russ, great to chat to you. What can we
It's a
learn
pleasure.
firstly about investors' attitudes towards the sector when we look at how these airlines have been able to raise a significant amount of capital recently?
I mean, they've been able to raise both debt and, in the case of EasyJet, for example, fresh equity, or alternatively, they've been able to tap governments like Cathay Pacific of Hong Kong. So it's clearly viewed as an industry that's still got long-term growth potential. And in the case of the governments, it's clearly viewed as a strategic industry of great importance to the social fabric. So in that respect, the airlines have got plenty going for them. The problem is that from an investment perspective, they're still fiercely volatile businesses. I know that the pandemic could not have been foreseen, but it doesn't take a drop of revenues of 90% to get these businesses into trouble. It only takes a drop of between 10 and say 20%, then they're in difficulty anyway because of the high operational gearing that they have. But the fact they've been able to raise money suggests that somebody somewhere thinks there may be better times ahead.
And it's interesting because, of course, we've seen these sharp drops in terms of the share prices, but it wasn't just because of the pandemic. If we take American Airlines, for example, it was already underperforming since the peak back in 2018, and it's lost about three quarters of its value. I mean, do you think we should be braced for more losses?
I think we're going to definitely have to be braced for more volatility. It's fascinating you say that. EasyJet's share price peaked in 2015 when its profits did, and we'd actually seen multiple airlines go out of business before COVID-19. Thomas Cook, Monarch and Flybe in the UK, just three examples. Excel in France, Adria in Slovenia, Primera in Denmark. There've been lots of others, and I think there the issue was very much one of too much capacity, economic growth that was sort of okay. And in some cases, I think airline executives probably getting a little bit too excited. You mentioned American there. In October 2017, Chairman and CEO Doug Parker made a quote that he felt the industry had changed forever and that it would always be profitable. That's not worked out so well so far.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the data from the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, it's shown actually that recently we have seen a pickup in terms of travelers over the last 9 weeks, to be specific. When we think of the impact from COVID-19, do you think that the sector is past its worst now?
I think investors would like to think so, because if passenger numbers are down 98 or 99%, as they have been at Ryanair or Wizz or EasyJet here in the UK, then it really shouldn't be able to get much worse unless the airline ceases to trade. And investors have been looking at the second derivative. They've been trading off momentum in these stocks as revenues go from down 90 to down 80 to down 70, and hoping that that means since things are getting less worse, they will getting less bad. They will eventually start to get better, albeit possibly on a 2 to 3 year view. So I think that has been a big factor in why airline stocks rallied strongly in the spring. But investors must remember that if you look at there was a huge example pickup in air traffic again fairly quickly after 9/11 back in 2001, but a couple of airlines did go bust very quickly afterwards. So if you are looking to trade these stocks, and I suspect their history tells you that they're probably stocks to rent rather than stocks to own, then you need to try and pick the ones that have got the best balance sheets and can come through the most turbulence.
Yeah, and if we think of Warren Buffett, obviously we know that he sold his stakes in the big four airlines. Trump obviously not too pleased about that. Do you think that was the right decision?
Time will tell. I mean, Buffett has been a long-term critic of the industry, even once writing in one of his Berkshire Hathaway letters to shareholders that had somebody shot Orville and Wilbur Wright down that had done investors an awfully big favour by putting them off the industry for life. It's Buffett's second attempt to make money from the industry, his second failure. He went back in thinking that it had changed because, particularly in America, you'd seen a big wave of consolidation after the great financial crisis. You'd more or less emerged with four major players. And I think his view that that would provide some pricing and capacity discipline. That was, I think, possibly starting to break down in the late part of the last decade anyway, as capacity began to expand. So, which is why probably Doug Parker was getting excited as he began to expand the capacity, thinking it would be good forever. But I think now what you would fear, and this is what Buffett's other criticism of the industry was being, one bankruptcy leads to another in a domino effect. Because as one airline comes out of administration, purged of its debts, possibly with equity injection or state support, it can then come in and cut prices and make life an even bigger misery for everybody else, prompting further problems down the road. So I think that's probably why Buffett bailed out, because he's seen this before.
Now, if we're thinking geographically, obviously these issues are miring both the European and US airline sector, in fact, the airlines across the world. But I'm thinking about the US and Europe specifically. Where do you think the opportunities are more? Or to flip it on its head, which one is more risky?
I would personally say at the moment the US is more risky because it's still not seeing a major reduction in COVID cases. And you've got the 30th of September deadline coming up for when the US government could, in theory, stop supporting salaries at the airlines. I'm sure if forced, it would probably do something. But I think if you look at the US, philosophically, it's perhaps less well suited to coping with the lockdown because of its strong libertarian instincts, which have served it so well. You could make questions over its healthcare system relative to some of those available in Europe. So maybe the US is perhaps just less well suited to this sort of environment in some ways. You have some European countries that seem to have got a better handle on COVID, have got the numbers right down. They're starting to unlock earlier. And so perhaps passengers, when they do feel safe, will be more inclined to fly around within Europe than perhaps they would be within the US. And the EU at the moment seems to be investigating not letting American passengers in anywhere. So you would think, just looking through the prism of COVID, Europe may right now be in a slightly stronger position than the US.
Now, we learned today that Virgin Australia has been bought by US private equity group Bain. I'm wondering if you think this is a sign of things to come, if we're likely to see more PE investment or even more state intervention or more stepping in, essentially, whether it's from the private side or the public side.
I think more stepping in is very likely. I think there will be a requirement for more funds. We've just seen EasyJet do a sale and leaseback operation just a couple of days after a rights issue. So the scramble for cash is still on. Remember that IATA, the industry regulator, has talked about, I think, $35 billion worth of pre-sold tickets. So customers will either be looking for refunds on those or vouchers. So even when they do fly, they may be doing it on a ticket they've already purchased. It might not necessarily be cash flux. Private equity buying airlines, that's a bit new one on me. It's not the perfect airline industry for the private equity treatment of, yes, buying assets cheaply out of administration, I get, but not saddling them with debt or with financial leverage, because there's enough operational leverage in there already. So they don't need a big drop in revenue to get into trouble. So in that respect, they don't fit the private equity playbook. So I was intrigued by that, although there had been rumours of PE interest in Flybe. But I think you will see state interest, Cathay Pacific, Alitalia, Lufthansa, Air France, KLM, already examples. And that's why, again, I think it's going to stay a tricky industry, because when governments get involved, it doesn't necessarily mean the economics improve. It can even mean that they get worse. And that's why Michael O'Leary at Ryanair is absolutely hopping mad about what he argues as state bailouts that are unhelpful for those operators who've kept their finances sound. So I do think you'll see more bailouts. I do think you'll see more governments involved. There may be some prime assets to be cherry-picked after administration, so it won't do shareholders much good necessarily. But I think the net result could be difficult times for investors in the business for some time. You're going to have to be patient and be prepared for more volatility.
Ross, thank you so much for your time, as always.
It's a pleasure. Keep well.
And that was Russ Mould, Investment Director at AJ Bell. Now, quickly before letting you go, just to let you know, American Airlines is becoming an all-session stock on the IG platform from the 1st of July, meaning you can trade it out of hours. I'm Victoria Scholar, and thanks so much for watching IGTV.